Hello, everyone. This is John McDonald. This is a very special episode for me because I am going to be, much like Bryan Cranston, playing Zordon in an upcoming RPG of the Power Rangers. But for reasons we'll talk about today, I feel like mine's going to be slightly more successful than the 2017 Power Rangers reboot by Hasbro, which caused a lot of fallout. And I have a lot of things to say, and I'm going to try to make sure I say some positive things because I have quite the history with the Power Rangers, as we know from the 1995 film episode. And Magnus is along for the ride and probably has a ton of good points too. Hi, Magnus.
Greetings. Indeed. I feel this is a subject we could go into a great deal of depth with all the various points. Maybe we should talk about different eras and other workings about the Power Rangers in other episodes, because I definitely
Yeah.
I definitely feel that this is quite a potential rabbit hole.
I am going to talk about two
Mm,
two series that correlate directly to the film. So
mm,
I've done really well for that. I would like to start off
mhm,
with some context about this film
mm,
because this was a film in 2017. It was announced in like 2016. There was like a year of trailers and mystery. There was these really fantastic posters they did with the Rangers in silhouette with the
mm,
lightning shape on them. I really liked those, and I liked the concept until I saw the trailer of it. Yeah,
mm.
the trailer showed me how rough it was going to be, and it didn't get any better for me. But to give context to this, kind of the two biggest players in this film that I want to talk about are the director Dean Israelite
Mm,
and the guy that played Jason, Doc Ray Montgomery, because I think those are two of the bigger players. As the movie unfolds, other people in the cast get bigger because of it, and some of them actually keep this movie going along fairly well. And then one
mm,
of them I always forget about, which is never a good sign. Uh, yeah, so there's a lot of things to discuss in this movie. I'm going to start off
mm.
with the fact that this has a 51% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 5.9 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 63% like this movie from Google users.
Mm,
The director, Dean Israelite, actually directed a movie. I think he directed this. Let me double check to make sure I get this right. So he directed a movie called Project Almanac that came out in 2015 after a 2014 release.
mm.
And this movie was, or was it Battle Los Angeles? So, no. So, this movie, Project Almanac, was produced by Michael Bay. So the Michael Bayness of Power Ranger film doesn't just come from uh, an homage to the Transformer reboot movies, but it also is because Project Almanac and another movie he assisted on, Battle Los Angeles, which is about a global alien invasion through the eyes of the Marines. They all have kind of the same almost junky dystopian militaristic technology
Mm.
cautionary tale sort of vibe to it. So if I had known much about Dean Israelite, I probably would have gotten the movie I expected. Which is not to say it's necessarily good. I'm just saying the guy has kind of a
A
signature.
style.
He does really well in Lionsgate films because Lionsgate films sometimes go that direction. So
Mm,
if you knew about Dean Israelite, you
mm,
weren't surprised by
indeed.
the film we got. So
No. Um, so the way that I've always summed up the 2017 film is there was glimmers of potential in some of the ideas that came across. But unfortunately, it was the execution and the realization of that potential that really didn't come about. And it does feel like they took the basic concept of the Power Rangers but they tried to put it through a very particular style of aesthetic, filmmaking, and themes, which didn't really suit what the Rangers were. It and what we end up with is, to my mind, a bit of an unholy mismatch of um, influence, bad influence from the Marvel films, taking certain points from them. Definitely a healthy dose of the Transformers, especially in the Zord design, which is not a good thing. And as you say, various action movies, and a sense that they thought they knew what the audience wanted to see through a modern retelling of the original Power Ranger story, but it certainly wasn't what we were wanting.
Well, so I don't want this to be completely negative. I actually have some good
Oh no,
points
no,
that
no.
I really love from this.
Yeah.
But that is something to think about. And here's where I'll start with the two connections to the
Yeah.
so the thing about this film is that
Mm,
it tanked an entire cinematic universe that was supposed to be created. It was the Ezra Miller of films, essentially.
mm.
It tanked a whole part of a universe. But it's also the reason
Ooh.
that either Hasbro got rid of or ended up with the Power Ranger IP. Like this film is directly responsible for the changeover in hands of who owned the Rangers after this. Um,
Mm,
and anyone that knows me knows I love the direction of Boom Comics, and so I feel like Boom Comics
mm,
is doing what they did but better. Um, and so it's there is a lot of
mm.
Transformers in it. That's with a purpose. I think partially that's not just popularity, but that's also why I bring up Dean Israelite
Yeah.
and their work with Michael Bay. I don't know if they met Michael Bay personally, but there's something very Michael Bay. This was also a time when we had, in 2017, people were still really into the robot movie where they call it Kaiju, and the guy from Torchwood plays the doctor, and the guy from It's Always Sunny is in it. Robert
Mm.
Kaczynski, John Boyega, the Pacific Rim film.
Oh, that one. Yes.
That
Sorry.
also influences it because if you think about something else as a sure bet, the problem is that um, Pacific Rim is much closer spiritually, I think, to what an Ultraman could have been than, say, a Power
Yes.
Rangers. I think if it had been an Ultraman film, or if it had been a completely new team of Rangers becoming Rangers for the first time, I might not have had such an issue with it. But the fact that they took historic, precious, and normally I say things aren't precious, but when you actually just
Mhm.
say, we're going to make a new Jason Lee Scott, it's like, no, Austin St. John is right there. And he literally came back for the 10th anniversary in Wild Force. Like, if Doc Ray Montgomery had come in and they had done the Breakfast Club meets Transformers thing with a new set of five, I think that could have gone over better
Mm,
because they lifted things from Power Ranger Turbo. They lifted a lot of my critique of this is actually my same critique of Dino Thunder.
mm.
And so for me, like part of the premise is that they start off with we're going to take these well-known, established, nostalgic characters that people had this deep love for,
Yeah.
and we're just gonna like we're gonna make up it's almost like they were like we want to make them woke but we don't want to, like we're answering questions about diversity from 1993 but in a movie in 2017, but like, and there was some good and some bad to that, but you can't
Mm,
talk about the movie without acknowledging there were some choices made that helped and actively hindered the film itself. So
mm. Yeah. Just trying to think of exactly where to start with that. Thinking about the young Rangers and such themselves, the actors that played them and such. I actually I liked the cast they chose to be in these roles.
can you name
I
all five of
think
them?
oh please don't ask me
Because
to
there's
name all
one of them.
of
I looked at the
these.
cast list and I was like, "Is was that their name? Were they in this movie? Really?"
There's
That's how much.
Darcy the Red Ranger, RJ was the blue one, Becky G was the Yellow Ranger, Uh, Ludi Lin was the Black Ranger, and the girl that played Jasmine in the new Aladdin live action was the Pink Ranger, but I forget her name.
Her name is
Yeah.
Naomi Scott. I always forget
I always,
about Ludi Lin. I guess his name is Ludi Lin, and he played Zach.
Hmm,
Um, yeah. So when people talk about this movie, they tend to talk about the Blue Ranger. They talk about RJ as Billy, as being one of the great spots of this movie. Um, what I kind of had an issue with is it felt like they got a whole bunch of newcomers, and then they hired Doc Ray straight off of basically Stranger Things. And
hmm,
I don't know if he got casted in Power Rangers and then Stranger Things, but it felt like they were trying to use Billy kind of in this new transplanted way to try to grab the Stranger Things audience, which is a whole different type of nostalgia, which makes it even
hmm,
more Transformers-y because Transformers was really an 80s cartoon, not a 90s thing. So it felt like an unproven Doc Ray Montgomery got stunt casted as the most iconic Ranger of all time. Even though some people argue Tommy is, I feel like when people
You-
think of the Power Rangers, they think of Jason as the Red Ranger, really.
yeah. You mentioned the audience, and that leads me to a thought. Who do you think the intended audience was for this film? Was it the peep kids from the 90s like myself who grown up with the original and were going to go and like watch a bit of nostalgia, or were they more trying to get in the kids, as it were, because it's Power Rangers?
Almost all the reviews that are like kind of positive but not really about this movie are all people that remembered the series from 93 to
Mm,
95 but didn't connect with it. So all the people that really like this movie seem to be the people that came in with no expectations of it, which maybe
mm,
that was very good. The only person that realized they were in a camp film was Elizabeth Banks as Rita Repulsa. She was the
mm.
only one chewing up the scenery that understood exactly the movie she was in. And Bill Hader's Alpha 5 was so distracting that I have no idea if Bill Hader knew anything about the Rangers or
Oh,
not.
oh,
Yeah.
I didn't
So
even realize that was Bill Hader, to be honest, until
yeah,
I
that
was doing
was Bill
episode.
Hader. That was Bill Hader as Alpha 5 with the ugliest robot design I've ever seen in
Oh,
cinema. It's like they took everything clunky about Johnny Five from the
mm,
Short Circuit movies and decided to make it like look like the Michelin Man. And like, say what you want about the Rangers, but Alpha 5 and Alpha 6 had an aesthetical, pleasing design. They were
yeah.
very
Mm.
C3PO. They had a very humanoid design. This Bill Hader Alpha 5 was just, I think it's one of the few Funko Pops that I saw that I was like, there's no way I can have this in my home.
Oh, oh my. Um, so going back to the cast, first point, going back to something you mentioned a little while back, you were saying about these newcomers filling in the shoes of legendary characters and legendary actors that had played them. I agree. I think if they'd gone in the direction of keeping Zordon, Alpha, and the dinosaur aesthetic, but maybe going like this is an alternative universe where a different cast of young people are chosen in the role, and because it's a different cast of young people, they can, in a way, establish themselves with their own adventure, and it feels like a homage without feeling like um, it's adapting too heavily from the original. Um, because then you still have those big shoes to fill, which
Yeah.
again, I liked the actors and what they were trying to do, but because there's little moments like Ludi Lin speaking in native Chinese to his mother, um, and like little interactions between Jason and Kimberly, I felt did work well, but they were too far in between. They were trying to have some heart to it. Um, but a lot of the time, the film seemed to be middling around a bit too much, trying to establish these new young people as a team. And because of that, we had about an hour and a half of not much happening
There's an
action
hour and a
wise.
half. It's basically an hour and a half training montage. It takes
Yes.
all the non-glamorous parts of learning to be a ranger but it doesn't give it enough of a story.
No.
Um, you know, so when the Power Rangers came out in '93,
Yeah.
we had a whole bunch of stuff from Sentai that got adapted in different ways. We had VR Troopers, Big Bad Beetleborgs, Mystic
Mm,
Knights of Tirnanog. So they could have taken the idea of the Beetleborgs and they could have done something not Angel Grove, and had it work. I think the problem was is that then you can't grab the people in our age bracket
yeah.
who might not remember that. It might have been more accessible and made a better movie, but then you don't necessarily recoup on the nostalgia. There were some good points to these characters too, where if they had been other people, or if it had been handled a little differently, might have worked. Rita having a conversation with Naomi Scott's Kimberly Hart about the idea of power and the idea of popularity.
Mm,
Because the idea of Kimberly here is that she's a mean girl, and it works really well.
mm.
A lot of my friends that saw it that liked that Becky G's Trini was, I believe she was openly queer. She had a girlfriend. So a lot of them really felt strongly about the representation, really loved it.
Mm.
But outside of that, everything else seems to fall apart. RJ's weird thing about Krispy Kreme donuts, as kind of shoehorned in merchandising for this movie,
Yeah.
rubbed a few people the wrong way. But
Mm.
alternatively, RJ was one of the wheels that kept the movie spinning for a lot of people, and they really liked him in
Yes.
this film. So it's kind of like if they had less Krispy Kreme and more organic RJ, then it might have worked.
Mm.
It might have also worked if they hadn't outright stolen several things from probably the least successful of the of its era, the Dino Thunder.
Mm.
And I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but I feel like I need to talk about this in relationship to this film.
Okay.
So I found Dino Thunder really jarring, and I also found it very snarky about its source material. Yes, it brings back Tommy Oliver, but
Mm.
it seemed like it was joking about itself a lot. It seemed like it was to the point of trying to not take itself so seriously
Mm.
and trying to acknowledge the past, but also kind of make fun of it. But the problem is that when you bring Tommy Oliver in, and then the principal, who's also the secret evil villain of the season, is like, "Aren't you low to be a ranger?" And he becomes a ranger. It's like, okay, I get it. It's tongue in cheek, but you don't have to go
Mm.
that far. So first of all, it had that snark factor of trying to acknowledge the plot holes in a universe where if you start poking plot holes, things are going to get bad. So don't do it. Just let it be what it is. So the first thing is it wasn't comfortable with what it was. The second one is that the design of the power coins in the fossil thing in the rocks straight out of Dino Thunder, kind of
Mm.
falling down into the underground fortress water pool straight out of Dino Thunder. Dino Thunder, one of the great things about Dino Thunder was the way they got their Zords was by calming down the animal
Mm.
Zord machines. And they did not do that here, which is one of the only things I liked about Dino Thunder. Also, they stole the um, teens with attitude getting powers outside of their morphing suit from Dino Thunder, and I thought that was also really awful. So it's very much like they took all the things I didn't like about one of my lowest ranked seasons and
Yeah.
tried to make it into a 2 hour like new thing. And it's like, no, this is not new. You're not doing anything interesting with this thing that I love so dearly. So
Oh God, you mentioning about powers outside of the suits.
I
That
get so
reminds me of
angry
that.
because it robs you of a chance to grow. Like there's literally there. The only time when it works is in Dino Charge because the
Mhm.
people that have abilities outside of that, they show them training and honing those abilities in little
Mhm.
segments. Like when we meet Riley, he already knows how to fence. He doesn't learn that magically because of the energem. And so
No.
like when you
Yeah.
just give them straight up powers outside of the suit, it's like is this is not Captain Planet. They don't need rings to give them the ability to wield elements. Like the whole point of the armor, because it is armor, is to
Mm.
enhance your abilities. But if you just give them abilities, then
Yeah.
it's like and then they have trouble morphing. So they have all these powers in this movie and they can't like utilize them properly. And it's, I mean, there's a point in this movie where it's just like a train wreck training montage that I think is supposed to be like the scene in the original pilot,
Yeah.
where they've said no, we don't want these powers. This is crazy, and they go out into like the desert in front of the command center and they get
Yes.
attacked by
They-
putties.
mm,
But it only worked in the original series because they were like, we're going to try this instead of bickering with each other and then magically morphing. Like there's a whole, the concept between the two scenes are so vitally different, both in age
mm,
of the cast, reaction, and in what they want in those scenes,
mm.
that they're just so diametrically opposed. And it's like you gave them the same name, you gave them a different face and a different reason for being, and it just doesn't work.
No. The, the issue is we're comparing the pilot from the TV show to the movie. And the problem is when you have, as we've said, it's one thing for a short TV show pilot to cram this into a 20-minute episode. It's another thing for them to be going through an hour and a half of this and what looks like weeks and weeks of like them training and such. Because I'm pretty sure it was it weeks or day. I forget.
It
How long
was
were they
a long
training?
time. It was so long, like Zordon fires them or something like that. Like,
Well, oh wow.
which is a whole nother thing. The most benevolent patient mentor in the universe firing you from guard duty, essentially. It's like, did Bryan Cranston look at the script and go, wait a second, this isn't the show that I remember? Or like, it's just one of those things where like, I don't, it felt like they didn't understand the concept of Zordon, because when Zordon is killed in Power Rangers, because Andros has to sacrifice him to save the universe,
Yes.
that's a
Mm,
deep and heartfelt moment. And the issue with this is that they almost humanize Zordon too much. One of the best things about the movie is the
yeah.
opening where they give Zordon that backstory against Rita,
Mm,
but then they continue just making Zordon essentially into this guy instead of this cosmic Wizard of Oz figurehead that he was in
yes.
the show. Also, just the instead of giving him a tube, they gave him like this TV wall. And I gotta tell
Mm,
you, the Zordon design was just almost as distracting as the Alpha 5. Like nothing
mm,
in this command center was pretty, was campy. It was all kind of gritty and too real, and it
well,
wasn't fun. There
was
was no fun to it.
no. Well, it wasn't even a command center. Um, I want to touch back on a couple of other points in a second, but I'll just do this one whilst I think about it. It wasn't even a command center. It was the downed spaceship, if I remember correctly. Which again, it's a bit Transformers-y in that sense because they every Transformer series, they always seem to be operating from their downed spaceships. The original Transformers, Beast Wars, the new movies and such. So we're going to go with that pattern and do the down spaceship and turn it into our headquarters, sort of thing. Um, what you were saying before about powers, that reminds me one of the most interesting scenes, I think, in the movie. They had to be a Spider-Man moment when all of a sudden the kids wake up and they realize they've got buff. And there's a moment when Darce, I think he breaks the sink in his bedroom by accident by taking a chunk out of it. Um,
Yeah, it's
which
yeah,
is
it's definitely
interesting.
it's a trope. I think
Yes.
it was partially an excuse to like there's something where they've tried to make this like a pre-Riverdale sexy ranger group, but the whole idea of the rangers is that you can imprint yourself on them a little bit. And
But,
the original group, even in the comics, like
yeah.
there's not as much of a sexualization eye candy element. There are some rangers that are very attractive, very hunky, but
Mm.
like I feel like it's kind of like they misunderstood how to represent teens in this universe. And going with gritty, they also tried to make sexy, and it didn't
Well, mm,
work. so well, especially because you've got Ludi Lin and Doc Ray looking great, and you put that against like I don't remember if they buffed up RJ Seiler, so RJ was buffed up too, but like you can't so
Oh,
far nerd Billy that they look like they shouldn't have any ranger power at all. Like I don't remember if that happened in my mind, but like in my mind I felt like they went a little too far with Doc Gray and Ludi and kind of left RJ behind. I could be wrong about that.
I don't recall. I know that I saw them that before the movie came out, they were doing several, the actual actors were doing some stories on Instagram showing themselves training at the gym constantly. Um, so they all really were hitting the benches quite a lot in preparation for the filming and such. Um, yeah. So how I feel like with the structure of the film, I think what would have worked better is um instead of doing sort of like a big lead up and then fight Rita at the end, would have been to sort of do like Zordon's introduced their training to be a team, but for kind of interspaced as they're training to become better, Rita sends out a few monsters to try and get her hands on what she's after. Oh, and by the way, the fact that the legendary Zeo crystal was buried under the blasted Krispy Kremes.
Okay. So
And,
here's
yeah.
here's a couple of things that are oh no yeah go ahead finish with that.
Sorry. So my thought, yeah. So my thought was they could go out and fight a few monsters, fight some putties and such. Like in a way, it then brings a sense of their training, but they're also starting to escalate things to the point of like bring out Goldar, um, instead of sort of just here he comes and now we're going to have a Megazord battle.
Well, so there's a couple interesting things there. One is that I actually like the concept of you can make the putties out of any element,
Yeah.
which is something they do in this movie. I think that's actually a very an interesting thing that they could have done in the series. Um,
Mm.
I have an issue with the minions in this movie because each of Rita's minions kind of point to one of the Rangers in their antithesis. They're very much the psycho evil Rangers before this. So you've got Squat and Babu, and Squat is kind of this opposite for Zach. And you've got
Mm.
Babu, who's this opposite of Kimberly. You've got Finster, the
Mm.
opposite, Billy, Goldar, the opposite of Jason, and later on Scorpina as the opposite
Mm.
of Trini.
Yeah.
But like you've also got the monsters. So you've got like Mr. Sphinx, you've got Eye Guy, you've got Pudgy Pig, you've got these like you do all this iconography to try to draw back to the original movie, but you
Mm.
don't include any of that. You don't really get a Finster character. You don't get a
No.
Goldar that is a wolf dog from an alien planet, which is part of his backstory. But you include the Zeo crystal so that you can do the cliffhanger at the end so you can
Yeah.
tease a female Tommy that we never see in a movie that's never going to happen. And
And
it's like, why do you have the Zeo crystals? Wasn't it enough that, like, yes, bury the Zeo crystals, but why did you bring it into this movie if you were there's, I know they were thinking about a cinematic universe, but there are steps you
yeah.
have to take to create a successful product to get there. You can't just skip it because you can use the same nomenclature. Like, it doesn't work that way.
And remember they explicitly brought up Lord Zed as the one that corrupted Rita.
I mean,
So they were, yeah.
which is kind of accurate, but it's also not. It's because it's one of those things in comics where like yes and no, because you can always reboot the universe to like have something
Mhm.
else happen, but it's
Yeah.
also like why did they bring up Lord Zed? Like if you're introducing a new version of the world, same characters, different faces, if Rita's an evil enough villain to sustain an entire season on her own minus Zed without needing to bring in Zed, without needing to bring in the Zeo crystals, why bring in all this extra baggage that you're just going to assume people will know that if this is geared more toward the kids of Power Ranger fans than the original Power Ranger fans themselves. Like something about bringing in Zed and the Zeo Crystal like either it was a really cocky thing to do or it was something that wasn't thought through in what if maybe this movie isn't the movie we think we're making? Like, what if
Mm.
people don't respond to this? And it bothers me because Goldar is one of the best Power Ranger villain henchmen, and to decide
Yes.
we're just going to make him a giant sand creature with no face and no absolute
Mm.
werewolf visage, like, I don't think they really like it felt like they dwelt on the idea of how can we upgrade the Rangers, but they didn't think about part of what makes the Ranger universe work are the people that the villain surrounds himself with. It's actually what
Yeah.
makes Dino Charge an interesting series. Because in Super Dino Charge, you get Heckle, but in Dino
Mm.
Charge, you have this really great. It's what makes Jungle Fury work too, in a lot of ways. And so it doesn't work in this movie because you have the iconography and the nomenclature, but you've twisted it and you've made it so gritty
Yeah.
that you can't have fun with it, and you can't bring in, like, if they had brought in Eye Guy, it would have broken that gritty continuity they wanted.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Eye Guy is one of the things that makes the Power Rangers series
Yeah.
great. Is it's a man made out of eyeballs. Like I can't
Yeah.
express enough that when you watch it, it's just something you kind of have to give yourself to in a really great way. And like I would like to actually, if we think about it, because some of the things we've talked about that made the 95 movie great are really things that fail in the 2017 movie.
Mm.
Um, and so I really want to kind of do a comparison both in how the Power Rangers are perceived and uh, what kind of things they change to make it work. Because it's an easier comparison to almost say the Power Ranger movie, Power Ranger Turbo, and then the Power Ranger reboot, because they're all films. They're all finite 2.5 hour creations based upon this
Mm.
concept. So it might actually be a really great way to
Mm. So do you want to do that now? Do you want to do some quick fire points of where you think the main comparisons are between the two and the contrasts?
go. Yeah, I think Ivan Ooze is a good place to start. Ivan Ooze
Mm.
was a super campy villain. Ivan Ooze monologued a
Mm.
lot. Ivan Ooze was this kind of fun, non-traditional thing, and I think Elizabeth Banks probably studied Ivan Ooze a lot for this version of Rita. And I think it's one of the few
Yeah.
things that are really strong in work in this movie. Also, Rita's costume designer doing that nod to green, doing like a poison ivy
Mm.
subversion of an Earth savior, Earth mother elements, I think really
Mm.
works. Whatever they did to get
Yeah.
Elizabeth Banks in this movie, they should have kissed her feet at the premiere because she was one of the few things that made this work visually. Because a lot of the visuals of this movie fail um,
Mm.
in a way that the original Power Ranger movie didn't, but in a way that Turbo kind of did. Because Turbo made some not great choices aesthetically that don't make sense in the same way that the Zeo crystal somehow is buried under the Krispy Kreme shop. Like I'm always boggled by that because how far
Oh,
how far deep it would have to be buried. Like I'm just trying to think of
and
trying to get through the layers of earth to get to where it would be buried underneath the Krispy Kreme shop.
yeah. And what do you think about the fact that they retroactively made the Zeo crystal the source of all life on Earth, and that it would directly impact it depending on what was done to the Zeo crystal?
I don't I don't think we ever learned enough about the original Zeo crystal for that to be a problem. I feel like I learned more about the gold armor than I ever learned about, because the Zeo crystal is like the power crystals and the power coins.
Yeah.
Like they are a means to an end. So it's good to know about
Yeah.
their past, but if you don't learn about them, you can see what they do by how they react.
Yes.
I think for me, the fact that it's the Zeo crystal is the problem because the Zeo crystal is a very important moment in time for the Rangers, and it's a big jumping off point for directions the series will go. Um, like I said, because they did stuff that so heavily mirrored Dino Thunder, I found
Mm.
I found the concept of the Zeo crystal here very distracting because like
Mm.
if you're going to rip off Dino Thunder, we've already done this. What are you doing? Why are you bringing Zeo in this? Like, why wouldn't you go right to like Ninja Steel or something?
Yeah.
It could have been the ninja steel crystal. And if the fact is, if you make it into the ninja steel crystal and it still works, it was a bad choice to begin with. Because if you can just interchange it, it's not special and it's not something with any immediacy. And a lot of this movie suggests a lack of immediacy. The training montage that lasts an hour and a half, even though the Zeo crystals need to be protected. Like Zordon had absolutely no urgency, and I feel like 1993 Zordon would have at least said, "Hey, we got a time limit on this." Um, like I, yeah.
So I'll go to my quick comparison of the two movies in a second. One thing I should note is considering what hints they were laying, I get the feeling if they'd gone ahead with the other movies that they were proposing to do in the series, it almost feels like they would, because they would bring in the Zeo crystal so early, that they would jump from Mighty Morphin to Zeo powers in the following movie.
Well,
And
technically,
bring in
technically that
Red.
wasn't a jump because the Aqua
Yeah.
Rangers were a part of Mighty Morphin.
Mm,
Technically, because that was all about the timeline where everybody got made younger. So technically,
yeah.
if you want to get technical about canon, which we probably shouldn't as a thread to pull
No.
too far,
Um,
yeah.
I was meaning that they would end up skipping the Thunder and Ninja Zords in favor of the Zeo Zords, which would be a bold choice of direction had they gone with that. But well, they didn't in the end.
Well,
Um,
and that's
so
that's one of the things that worked about the Power Ranger movie for me was actually the changeover. Like we talked in the episode about the film about Dulcea and about getting the ninja powers in the movie, which is an alternate universe from the show itself, which is why
yeah.
Ninjor exists.
Mm,
And how that worked because that was so different in location and different in feel and different in nature. This movie is all inner city. There's
mm,
even in the places where we're in nature, we're in like a mine that Billy is trying to blow up or something. We're in a place at night in a forest that has a certain feel to it, and it's you really miss that dichotomy, and you don't know you're missing it until you think about how far afield the first Power Ranger movie. Even Power Ranger Turbo in its transformation sends them out on like a ye old yachting ship into a hurricane. Like even in the middle of that movie, there was something really extraordinary that broke it up. And this
mm.
movie just doesn't do something extraordinary. So when I talk about Power Ranger 2017 and its relation to Turbo, this is both where 2017 succeeds and fails. And the way that it succeeds is I talked about this earlier, the idea of the breakfast club element. The
Mm,
idea of becoming rangers actually helps um, helps the people to understand themselves better. And as teenagers, becoming rangers doesn't just bring them to better, it makes them better people, better citizens. And I
mm,
like that. Versus, say, Justin, whose unbridled 10-year-old optimism is the main reason people actually ended up leaving the Ranger fandom for a while. Uh,
mm,
and I'm sure the actor is a lovely person, but he was saddled with being a character that nobody was really going to like. Um,
mm.
and it's an interesting thing because in Sentai, that concept has a lot more leverage and lift because the original White Ranger was like a 10-year-old kid. Um,
Yes.
so it doesn't work in Power Rangers, but works in Sentai. So I like the stark contrast. I like that they were kind of bad kids in detention that became Rangers. I actually think that works really well. It's something they also stole from Dino Thunder, but they did it so differently that I can't hate it.
Yeah.
Um, I like the redeemable kid trope. It's actually something that makes Wild Force hard for me because they're all really good in the same kind of way, except for Allison.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so in that way, it actually works for me, but in the same way where Turbo doesn't work, and this is where we can talk more about aesthetic, the Zords. The big criticism of Power Ranger Turbo was because we had Transformers and Micro Machines, the Zords weren't new. They weren't dinosaurs anymore. They weren't animals. They were something we already had, which were cars.
yeah.
Um, So in the way here, the Zords not just being so functionally ugly, but also functionally just being exoskeleton Fazbear, Freddy Fright versions of things that we already held dear. There was nothing I could aesthetically grab onto with
Mm,
these Zords. They also didn't really know, which is the conceit of the original series, was that when they entered the Zords, they knew how to use them, like
mm,
bringing into mind something of them actually having Rangerdom already in them. But in this one, they had to learn how to command the Zords, and I hated that. I hated every second of it. Like
mm,
there's something very grand and beautiful about the way that you use the idea of a Zord, and especially then combining into a Megazord to talk about the dynamics of your team. And when
mm,
it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I've never been to a Ranger movie where it didn't work. And I have to tell you, I didn't like it. I'd much rather Adam complain for 2 hours about being a toad or a frog than I would having to sit through that sequence again of them in their ugly armor, in their ugly Zords, battling ugly Goldar. And it's just like aesthetic is
yeah.
sometimes important. And Power Ranger 2017 proves why sometimes aesthetic is important.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you have a look at toys and stuff like that, what is the Zords that everyone keeps coming back to and thinks about when they think about Power Rangers? The original Megazord. It's an iconic robot, not just in Power Rangers, but I would say in pop culture in general. When you think giant robots, you necessarily think of the original Power Rangers Megazord, and to a lesser extent, like the Dragon Zord, the
Yeah.
Green Ranger Zord.
I think
You think,
Green Ranger Zord
um,
actually, the Dragon Zord actually does get a lot of play. I think it has to do with the elegance of them. Some of the later Zords from different series look very unwieldy and very hard to
yeah,
move. And something about the Megazord and the Dragon Zord, they actually seem like manageable creations. I love
yeah.
Wild Force, but the interior of their Zord where they're all standing and doing things instead of sitting at like a console, every time I'm just like, and they're gonna fall, and they're falling, and they never fall.
Oh God, don't watch the recent Power Ranger series then, because they're standing all the time.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
still so angry with Megaforce and Super Megaforce. I just haven't really
yeah.
gotten into it.
I would say
That's neither
Dino
here nor there.
Fury. I would say Dino Fury really does bring it back quite a bit. It's a lot more watchable than Megaforce was, and you do actually connect to some of the Rangers with what they're doing. Um, and dare I say, whereas you could, I like the fact that they made the Yellow Ranger a lesbian in this movie, but it was only really mentioned around the campfire the once, and that was like sort of part of her character explained, and it wasn't really touched upon again. Whereas the Green Ranger and Dino Fury is an out and proud lesbian and has a girlfriend, and her parents are supportive of that and everything. And it's like they give it a lot more depth, shall we say,
Well,
than
and the fireside scene is very much the scene in the Breakfast Club where they've been left to their own devices and they're opening up to each other about not just why they're in detention,
oh,
but also how they got there and what outside forces. So like there's a lot
yeah.
of Breakfast Club in
Yes.
like but Breakfast Club already exists as a film. St. Elmo's Fire already exists. Like you didn't need to add robots to it. You're not adding anything to the experience with that.
Mm.
Which makes me
I,
angry because I'm supposed to love it. And that makes me angry to say that. I hate that I'm dissing so hard on a Power Rangers film because it's like the one thing that I irrationally love. And it actually,
Mm.
I was really concerned about it. And I like reached out on Twitter to people that could get me in contact and be like, please don't ruin this franchise. And I guess nobody heard my.
Oh, uh, your efforts, even though it wasn't successful, your efforts are much appreciated, sir.
Well, now we have the
Like,
great work of Boom Studios. So even
yeah,
if the
and
TV show goes south, we still have Boom Studios.
mm, um, indeed. So I'm going to touch upon that in a second. I'm going to quick fire through some points I have, before I forget them. So I agree with you about the Megazord. ugly aesthetic. I'm not sure how they got through with that Megazord through the planning stages and how they didn't get any viewer feedback as to, you know what, actually, this might not be a good Megazord to go with because the viewers aren't going to like it. I wonder whether, aesthetically wise, they were leaning so heavily into the Power Ranger powers and the Zords being alien tech to the point that they were trying to make them feel otherworldly almost because they were from another planet. But because of that, it just they go a bit too far into it, if that makes sense, to the point where it doesn't look good. Um, so it's that you were mentioning about the fireside thing. I think another trope that they want to use in this movie is found family because they were trying to make the Rangers connect to each other like a family unit. Unfortunately, they spent majority of the film trying to do that, uh, and that was really all that there was for it, if that makes sense.
I think the
Um,
only Zord that actually works aesthetically is probably the Pterodactyl Zord. And that's just because that design is so compact, you can't do too much to it. Oh, but this saber-tooth tiger Zord, if you have not seen these schematics of it, this is like there's a reticulated spine on this thing, and it's just it looks like somebody was trying to make like a yellow Tesla. It's not.
ooh,
This is not cute. It's
you know
not.
what? Actually, it reminds me of. Now that I think about it, the Zord designs and such. There's a bit of H.R. Geiger influence in them, almost
There is
alien
Alien. You know what's
aspects.
interesting though, from far enough away in the opening when they finally come together, I just watched kind of the opening battle scene from a
Mm.
distance with the wings facing Goldar. They actually kind of look like Babu from the original series. They have the outline
Ooh.
of that slim spider-like body with the wings, and it's a very dark film, both aesthetically and in the plot. But like it kind of looks less like a Megazord. It looks almost like, the spider baboon villain.
Mm.
It's not like there's ways you can do it where it's alien, but it's also organic to the planet. And
Mm.
does not hit any good feelings inside of me. Also, it looks so much like Goldar. Like if you look at the scenes where they're in the same shot, they essentially look the same except Goldar is yellow, and I don't
Mm.
care for that at all.
uh, so do you? I wonder if there was like some replanning and re-editing and such during the film, and like certain parts don't necessarily connect so well to each other because they were making some changes even during the editing process. I don't have any proof of that. I just have a weird little feeling that there might be a change of direction at some point.
Well, for me, I mean, at the end of the day,
Hmm.
this doesn't really feel like a Power Ranger event in the same way that, say, Mighty Morphin Pink, the comic series where Kimberly
Yeah.
gets her own deputy of Fringe Pink Rangers from Zordon so she can save her mom, which is a fabulous comic arc if you've never read it. This to me feels like high school PSA, and then they were Rangers. Like we spend so much time on the idea of bullying, we spend so much time where there's that weird scene where RJ's parents are like worshiping Jason for showing up, even though he's a high school football player. And they're like just so amazed that their son, who's different, could make friends with the football player. Like, it's weird when adults do that kind of thing. It's just weird. And it's weird in this movie because it's so out of place. Because we've spent enough time with Doc Ray's version of Jason to know that he's
Yeah.
just a kid and he's not as great. Austin St. John as Jason Lee Scott was kind of this mythically kind jock in a way that
Mhm.
Doc Ray couldn't emulate because only Austin could do that. Like there was a reason that it worked when it did in '93. Um, and they were basically a just say no campaign on the road when they weren't actually being Rangers and they weren't getting paid enough. Uh,
Mm,
I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember the good parts about the 2017 Ranger movie that I really liked, but all the awful stuff really like drowns out.
mm,
Like I wish I could appreciate lesbian Trini. Like I wish it was a different character. Like honestly, like there's no reason they couldn't have done VR troopers. Like the aesthetic they have with this metal alien thing is essentially some sort of VR trooper Beetleborg hybrid. So
mm.
they could have easily like they could have taken the kids from Beetleborgs. Like they could have remade the characters, aged them up to high schoolers. Like they could have even kept them in Angel Grove because Angel Grove is such a ubiquitous seaside name that they could have kept them in Angel Grove. They could have kept Zordon, but
Yeah.
like it doesn't work with the five of them.
Mm.
I cannot express how much heavy lifting Elizabeth Banks does in this movie as
Yes.
Rita. Like I cannot express to you like how parts of this movie are only salvaged. Like the bullying PSA only works because Rita Repulsa confronts Kimberly in her bedroom in like this
Mm.
weird anti Melissa Etheridge come to my window, I'm gonna murder you sort of montage. But it works because it's Rita and she has a different sense of boundaries. And like that's the only time when the bullying PSA feels organic is when Kimberly needs to learn this lesson. But it goes back to the idea of this is Breakfast Club with robots and how it doesn't work because the whole background is she's an evil space alien person, but also somebody who wants to take over Earth. Once again, you don't want to pull the curtain too back
No.
far on the plot. But it's yeah, there's just
Well,
so much. Uh,
yeah, there is a great deal to it to not just to discuss, but to dissect and what have you. So at the end of the day, I feel that the greatest flaw that attacked this movie was the fact that they put it through the grim and gritty filter. They wanted to modernize it for a current audience. Like, take the ideas from the 90s and sort of retell it in sort of an epic superhero action movie. But what happened when they started to make it all grim and gritty? They lost the campness. They lost the at times almost the fun, playful side of things, along with being what was the cool factor back then. Um, and they turned it into something that wears the skin of Power Rangers, but definitely in many ways doesn't feel like a Power Ranger movie. Like, as you say, Elizabeth Banks, she did a lot of heavy lifting as Rita, but she was missing Rita's like over the top dramatic side, which made her such a memorable character. They were missing her gang of underlings. Every good villain has her own little squad of minions and such. And they made this Rita into sort of like a lone wolf, um, going out of her way to accomplish her goals and such. They made Zordon this sort of like mentor of ulterior goals because if you recall, he was hoping the Rangers would activate their powers and then he could take that power and resurrect himself again in a new body or something. Um,
yeah, which is why Jason doesn't trust him when he finds
no,
out the real
that,
motive, and it's an
that's,
exhausting subplot that doesn't make any sense because the conceit of
yeah,
Zordon is in his containment fields. If he doesn't have it, he dies. Like that's the
yeah.
whole conceit of the first Power Ranger movie. Like the villain is
Mm.
time, not as much as Ivan Ooze is the villain. So here's an interesting too. I wonder if someone in Lionsgate saw because Lionsgate produced this,
Yeah.
and I wonder if someone saw this movie and realized it wasn't going to be a summer hit because it was released like in mid-March, which is a weird time to release a movie. It wasn't released as a
Mm,
summer hit. It wasn't like a winter movie like all the Star
no.
Wars sequels were. It was released like at the end of March. That's such a weird time period to release a movie
Yeah.
in. Also, the budget for the movie was $120 million.
Mm,
They made this movie. This is what $120 million gets you.
it's absolutely insane
That is, yeah. Uh,
when you look at fan productions and like TV, we look at TV series which don't even have a quarter of that budget, and they make something that looks and feels like absolutely tons better.
I
I
mean,
think
I
it
talk about Dino Charge a lot, but like Dino Charge. So I found this out. You're going to appreciate this. So Chase's
mm,
character was actually added to the cast because they got special dispensation from like the New Zealand government for something they were shooting. So the reason we
what?
got Chase as a character in Dino Charge was because they wanted like New Zealand representation of the cast.
Oh,
So it's little things like that that kind of make me smile because they turn out so well. Like Dino
mm,
Charge is what the Power Ranger movie could have been because it's an
mm,
updated version. It still has that same feel. You get the wonder of things. You have the
yeah,
mentorship. You have this. I actually like Dino Charge for a lot of reasons. A lot of the same reasons I like Jungle Fury actually.
mm,
Um, but ironically, Jungle Fury, I can look past the aesthetic flaws of the morphing sunglasses and the
mm,
outfits because I love the story so much.
yeah,
Here I can't look past it because I don't have a story I love and I don't have a morphing suit
mm,
I love. Like they tried to keep that diamond in the center aesthetically, but the rest of its surrounding goes so far into battle
yeah,
armor, I lose what could be the fluidity of a ranger movement.
mm,
And that really like the more I look
mm,
at it, the more upset I get, really is what
yeah.
it is.
I mean, we haven't even mentioned the fact that, and this is a point that my partner brought up straight away when he saw the armor for the first time. He said, "Golly, they're taking a lot of influence from Iron Man now, aren't they?" And it's true because if you have a look, the suits are so Iron Man-esque in many ways. It does make you wonder,
Yeah.
like that's the direction basically they chose over the spandex, but then is it a good direction to go in?
Well, and the close-ups of it, they've tried to mirror what they did with these kind of morphing gem jewel things. They tried to make the
Mm,
close-ups on the suit have this kind of stone texture. But the problem with that is that they don't look good close up. Also, the shot of them in a lineup so hard highlights Becky G's boobs in her like boob
mm,
cups that like it's kind of off-putting and awkward because they are still in high school in Canada.
yeah.
It's very much like I understand that you were trying to tie things together, but if you're leaning into the fantasy, why? Like,
And,
why? What's the point? What are you
then
doing this for? What is the message? What is the point? You know?
and then actually if you think about it, going back to the whole scene where they are examining their bodies after they got their powers and suddenly got buff. If you think about it, that actually adds an uncomfortable element to that scene, considering these are high schoolers,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're looking at their their ripped bods, so to
I
speak.
I have to say also I really hate the lower jaw because I always had a problem with the original Power Ranger suits where they have this great kind of
Mm,
colored armor spandex and then they've got this silver mouthpiece around their mouth. They pronounce that like they give them like crimson chin, fairly odd parent chin, and then
mm,
like half of the mouth is taken up by this weird silver plating that distracts. This is like the opposite of the Sentai Lupin Ranger magic hat costumes that I think
mm,
are great. It's like if they took everything I loved about the Kira Major suits and was like, let's make it worse.
mm.
If they had like done a Kira Major movie, I bet I probably would have liked it more because it would make more sense with the aesthetic of these weird Iron Man. Like even the guys have these weird bra boob cup things going on, so they get they get this like diamond shape, but
Yeah.
like it doesn't look good. Nobody There is no child I can imagine looking at this and going, "This is a Halloween costume I want to wear.
No.
This is the birthday party I want to have." And I have to tell you, the only successful element of this that I absolutely love is they did a second version of the silhouetted lightning, but they did
Mm,
it in like neon with them coming out in their armor. And I don't hate that. Like when they did the lightning motif in shadow and then in neon, that worked. I don't hate it. But everything else is really like it's just it's hard to look at. Like it's hard to continually look at. And that's
yeah.
bad. That's bad
No.
for a brand that is built on an aesthetic. Like Rangers has an aesthetic, and this
Not,
movie just
no.
breaks it in a bad way.
And dare I say a brand that's also built on longevity to an extent, because even though nowadays Rangers change over casts and themes like every 1 to 2 seasons, it's still pretty much like it's an indefinite length of time they expect Power Rangers as a brand to keep running for, especially now with Hasbro and its plans the franchise spanning multiple movies, new deals with for TV shows and Netflix and what have you. They clearly got a long-term plan in mind for what they want to do with Power Rangers.
Well, and
Um,
and I didn't mind. I don't mind that now because that's closer to what spiritually Sentai and Kamen Rider do every year, changing over casts and locations.
yeah,
But in '93, when they did it, when they brought in
yeah.
Tommy, I got so angry because in America we'd never had that. We'd never been trained to expect that. It was always one, and that had always been Ham Saban's thing was to do a new cast every year. But
Oh,
like you have to train American audiences for that because we get attached and hard. It's why Home
oh.
Improvement ran for like 400 years in the 90s because you get attached hard no matter how bad it gets.
Mm,
Um,
oh.
I can't imagine this as a universe either. Like, where can you go? Because you can't get any grittier. Grittier turns into Harry Potter movie 5 where no one can see anything because it's like
Oh no.
shadows. So it's like, where would you have gone in a sequel movie? Because you can't, even if you do the ninja, you can't turn the ape red
Well,
ninja Zord into like you can maybe do the Thunder Zords because one of them was a dragon, so that could work. But like I'm trying to figure out where you would go mechanically and visually. Like you have to come around to camp again because you've got nowhere to go grittier. There's nothing grittier than these five sentient Iron Man colors, I guess. Also,
well,
what would the Dragon Zord have looked like? What would Tommy's Dragon Zord have looked like? Good God, it's frightening to think about. It's like it would be like Mecha Godzilla. Oh, I'm so upset now. I don't even like
calm
Tommy.
down, sir. Calm down, sir. Don't lose it. It's not going to happen. That universe is now dead and buried. Because I mean, seriously, the movie did so badly. They cancelled all the movies. I can't see them revisiting this for future expanded universe stuff like comics, books, etc. Um, so this is literally the one point that it's going to be in this version of Power Rangers. So don't worry,
This is like the
you don't
opposite
have
of the
to go
Star
any
Wars
further.
sequels, where it's gotten
Oh,
better in the comics with age and gotten better in its extended universe. Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, when you look at 2017 Power Ranger the movie versus, say, the Omega Rangers and how they elegantly brought
yeah.
in Aisha, Rocky, and Adam into the comic universe.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
it's one of those things where like when you look at the legacy of what is possible with Tommy Oliver, with the Great Lightning collection figures of the Shattered Grid Universe Rangers, it's like
Yeah.
it's there. All the pieces are there. That's one of my favorite. Actually, they do that mashup in Shattered Grid of those three Zords into that one new Zord they have to name. And I absolutely like adored the concept of Shattered Grid. It was very sad, but I thought it was really good. Also, I want to end on a positive. We're not done yet, but I want to end this thought on a positive. Um,
Okay.
I like the idea of redeeming because it does harken back to Bulk and Skull. The Breakfast Club
Yeah.
angle of bad, almost bully kids becoming good harkens back
Mm.
to the journey of Bulk and Skull in both the Mighty Morphin movie and through their series because they were in all 5 seasons
Yeah.
of Mighty Morphin. They were there up until the cast went into space and left Justin behind, essentially.
Mm.
And then Bulk came back for Hyperforce, which is like its own specialized thing, but he's canonically a ranger. Like he's in the comics because
Yep.
Hyperforce are part of Shattered Grid. Um,
Yep.
and so for me, there is a great element of there was a lot of possibility with the idea of redemption.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't shown through in Promise, but there was an idea of redemption that had some merit. So that it wasn't a completely flawed movie. There's merit if you squint and turn your head sideways.
Yes. And it could be down the line that we can look at back at this movie and watch it with a bit more of a appreciative eye.
How
Um,
drunk am I going to
yes.
be for that? Like how much alcohol have I had that evening? Good lord, am I still
No,
awake?
no, no, no. But what I mean is, and we went into it on our first time viewing thinking if it was going to be something in particular. I think if we were to go in for another watch and try and just take it as it is, then we might be able to appreciate it a bit more than what it is. And to try and leave on the best possible note I can. The fact is, it did show their attempts to modernize the concept of the Rangers in some elements of them have, as you say, bad kids being redeemed, of them having personal struggles, but finding their more heroic side despite that their own struggles and such, and trying to step up despite their relative inexperience and youngness, and showing that young people could become heroes to protect everyone. Um, I mean, it was sort of shown a bit in the original Power Rangers movie and such, um, as well. But I do like the fact that they try to bring across here. And even though it's a really heavily flawed movie, and the fact is everyone could see it was very heavily flawed even before they went and saw it, it's still an interesting footnote in Ranger history. And this is this is going to be a slightly negative thing against the movie, but the thing is, like, its failure has led to Hasbro taking on the franchise, and they are trying to make a lot of effort to do justice to Power Rangers now. They're giving it a lot of financial backing. They're spending time planning out what they're going to do. So I think there is um, some positive premonitions for the Rangers' futures.
Yeah.
Um, and if they do adapt Shattered Grid into some big cross-spanning multiverse, I will be invested to see it.
Well, and it's possible to. What's great about the Ranger fandom is that, especially for people my age that are older, that have
Mm.
either discovered Sentai or are still in love with the Rangers themselves, you get things like Colin Bass's projects, Bloodlines of the Grid
Yep.
and First Ninja. So, like, we as a fandom have a capacity to do great things with this thing that we care about, that we have
Mm.
reverence for. But it's like Walter Jones leading like the Black Ranger Wakanda thing at one of the Comic Cons that you see. There's also there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of humor, but there's a lot of knowledge and art that comes into it. And I
Mm.
think some of there was that really great fan made project with I think James Vanderbeek playing like a really off balance angry Red Ranger. I think it was James.
Oh.
Um, and it wasn't Power Rangers Unworthy. It was something Power Rangers Unworthy is really good, but it was also like it was like a short 10-minute Power Ranger film where it's basically like when a ranger goes too far. And so like there's work that we do as a community, and there's work that we do with like the Power Ranger board game that has that really great
Mm.
rotated battlefield, and the Power Ranger RPG. that I'm going to be Zordoning, GMing for, that I'm very excited to showcase in the new year. And there's a lot of really great potential. And the people that were involved in the show understand just the power of how many years has Morphicon been going on and how much bigger has it got. Like Morphicon and Ranger Stop are like something I couldn't envision. Like, and of course, I often tell the story of how I cried the first time I met Austin St. John at an LA Comic Con. And I'm sure that was weird for him. But like, it's still a very touching thing. And the problem with the 2017 Power Ranger movie is it felt like it didn't understand how much the Rangers have an influence, not just in nostalgia, but
Yeah.
with how people that are creative make projects about, people
Mm.
with attitude about groups.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think it understood that as well as it should
No.
have. So as aesthetically, the failure was loud enough. If it had just been an aesthetic
Mm.
failure, I could probably have forgiven it. But there were a lot of
Yeah.
things I just can't look past.
No. Very, very true. And the thing is that people, it was only 5 years ago that it came out, but people and the fandom have moved on so much, even in that short span of time. And like, I think that give it another 5 years and, copies of the film will exist that here and there, but it will become a footnote and people will be on like watching the new reboot whenever it comes out.
I think it's
That
very possible the fandom will forgive Justin from Turbo before they'll forgive the reboot movie. And I don't know how many people of a certain age remember this, but the hate that the actor that played Justin got for playing this optimistic 10-year-old, like people were blaming him for ruining the franchise and like taking it down to
mm,
nothing.
no,
And like I don't think people understand that like that really happened. And we're lucky we didn't really
yeah,
live in an internet age. Because I cannot imagine
oh,
how bad that
it
must
was,
have been for him.
yeah, I feel really bad for the kid. It was a number of factors from what I remember coming together for Turbo. They were pushing for the inclusion of a kid as a ranger because they wanted to try and connect in a way more with the audience that was watching the show.
They did
But
have that kid from the first movie though. They didn't need to bring Justin in. They could have kept
um,
the what's his
yeah,
bucket from the first movie, Fred. I think his name was Fred. I don't know.
but
It's not
but
important.
the thing is, it's very irresponsible for Zordon to make a, a child of that age into a ranger, no matter how he tried to justify it.
Well, and it's a
Um,
Sentai tradition that doesn't
yeah,
always. There are Sentai traditions that don't make it into Power Rangers because they just don't work, and that's one of
yeah,
them. Like the
yeah,
White Ranger only really works as a natural stepping stone to Tommy taking his mantle as a good ranger because that
yeah,
Green Ranger suit comes with so much baggage.
yeah,
Also, that's when directors started changing, and you get that really great shot of like Billy's eyes in shadow in like that
mm,
1990s clone commercial sort of way. Um, but it's a really interesting thing to kind of. We've got a couple minutes left. What would a Power Ranger movie look like for you? Like if you were to direct one, what would you absolutely need from a Power Ranger movie?
it would. I would think I would go down one of two routes. I would either have an established team of rangers that are in the midst of their adventures, and you could do some flashback moments to show them starting to get together during the movie. But then, I mean, if this is a self-contained story of like the entirety of one season told within a movie, you kind of have to do it like that. So I'd either have it in a Ranger team in the midst of doing it with flashbacks and then leading up to their final battle against the main villain, or if we're starting off with a fresh team of Rangers, I would still have training montages and stuff and some fight scene montages, but keep them snappy, keep them sort of like so you've got this idea that a lot of events are happening in the movie, but it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming and they're not spending too much time on particular points. So it keeps things sort of going at quite a lightning pace, if that makes sense. Um, I suppose it depends on whether they would want to do a multiverse style film, with like different range of characters popping up. Um, say like if you got Zeo and Andros makes a surprise appearance, like visiting Zordon or something. That they would have to be handled well, but at least that would start to connect different range of teams as being in contact with each other in the universal fight against evil.
I think if I weren't going to do a new team coming together in truth, which is one of my
Mm,
favorite things and something that I heavily prize in the game that I'm going to be running,
mm,
is the concept of legacy and the idea of ceremony of becoming a ranger and getting all the things that make you a ranger
yeah.
along with your attitude. I'm kind of intrigued. Sentai does this weird like capture the flag, War of the Worlds, like one-off thing every few seasons where they just bring in a team of rangers, and they just battle each other for like some kind of special crystal that will make a wish. I kind of love the idea of this like capture the flag, mega laser tag ranger free for all, where it's not like people aren't turning evil, but it's like this really weird only Sentai can
Yeah,
pull it
that's
off competition thing. I really like that
Super
as a
Sentai
concept.
battle, Super Sentai Battle Royale, basically,
I
without killing.
love the concept because then you have so much
Yeah,
like I mean that also works too because you got things like the Injustice DC Street Fighter type games. And we have that Power Rangers, but it doesn't seem fun. Like we have a Power Ranger
no.
mobile game, but it's not fun. It seems very serious. And I
That
like my Power Rangers to be fun.
and that's the main point between the difference between Rangers and Sentai. Sentai is a little bit more tongue in cheek, a bit more free with itself. So, Rangers always treats everything quite.
Yeah.
It was still a serious measure, but we're about to end the podcast,
Yes.
so we better wrap up.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We had a really good time in spite of having to say more negative things than positive. But I appreciate everyone joining us, and we'll catch you next time for Everything is Gay, even the straight
So
stuff.
farewell, all.
Farewell.